And without any further ado, I would like to invite my colleague, Katie Hyatt, who is going to be moderating the member shares for the next portion of our session.
Thanks so much, Deanna. I hope everyone can hear me fine. So now we have the member shares, and I'm very excited because we've got three very interesting member shares today, and then another 3 tomorrow. Today is a little. We've got these three that are a little bit more tech focused. So we have, first up, we have Marisa McKasson, who's a program associate at the Center for Effective Global Action at Berkeley, also known as CEGA. And currently DCO, which is their Digital Credit Observatory, are undertaking studies that focus on women's economic empowerment. So she's going to be talking about these 8 studies. Now this is just started. The results are due out in a year or so, but she will be first up. Then we're going to hear from Deanna Morris, who is with ESCAP, and this is the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. And she is going to be discussing their Catalyzing Women's Entrepreneurship program. And finally, we're going to hear from Naomi Bourne, who's a program analyst at UNCDF. So she's going to discuss their Policy Accelerator program, which is really looking at direct feedback mechanisms between financial authorities and women's representatives to address policy and regulatory issues. So in between some of these member shares, we're going to have a couple of polls. So don't be alarmed if you're suddenly asked for your feedback on some related tangentially questions. And I would also ask that at the end of this, each of these member shares will speak for 5 minutes, and then at the end we'll have a question and answer session. We're not going to have individual question and answer sessions after each member share. So if you want to add your questions to the chat, that would be really useful, and then I can facilitate that session at the end of the entire session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Marisa McKasson.
Hi there, can everyone hear me? Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thanks to Katie and the FinEquity team for having me. As Katie mentioned, my name is Marisa McKasson, and I'm a program associate at the Center for Effective Global Action, which is a research hub based at UC Berkeley. I work on a research initiative supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation called the Digital Credit Observatory, or the DCO. And basically, the DCO supports rigorous impact evaluations on the impacts, both positive and negative, of digital credit in emerging markets. And so digital credit, as many of you most know, is credit that's determined using non-traditional data that is instant, automated, and remote. So when most people think of digital credit, they think of the big products like M-Shwari in Kenya, but digital credit is rapidly expanding around the globe. And so as you can see on the map here, we're really excited that we've funded 16 independent studies to understand how this new phenomenon is causally impacting borrowers, and they span 12 countries and 3 continents. In addition to funding research, the DCO maintains a strong network of private sector academic and policy members working on digital credit for the purposes of sharing information and identifying meaningful areas of collaboration. So as Katie said, we're currently in our final year. We're starting to have preliminary results available now, and we will continue to have preliminary results available through 2021. Next slide, please. So since this is the FinEquity annual meeting, I know that many of you care about women's financial inclusion specifically. And at the DCO, we kind of realized that in the public discourse, there's like some people that think that digital financial services can improve access to formal financing for women, but others are concerned that going digital could like increase the gender gap. And so at the DCO, we really wanted to make sure if we were producing this evidence on digital credit, that we were providing evidence that answers the type of research questions I have on the slide here. And that includes not just about barriers and access, but really trying to understand how digital financial services can empower or disempower women and what this can teach us about the design of digital credit products. So as Katie said, about half of our portfolio, 8 studies, focus on women's empowerment outcomes specifically. Next slide, please. So as I said, most of our projects are still in the field, so you'll have to subscribe to our newsletter to keep up to date on our findings. But I just wanted to give a quick sneak peek into some of the questions and findings that we have so far. And so a great example of some of our unique work is kind of work around algorithm development. And so one of these studies is a project by Sean Higgins and his research team in the Dominican Republic. And so basically in a lot of countries, including the US, it's illegal to consider gender when making credit decisions. But this research team found a provider in the Dominican Republic that was willing to play with their credit scoring model. And so basically they built a machine learning model that estimates credit scores separately by gender to see if they could reduce the gender credit gap, especially for low-income consumers. And so lo and behold, in this preliminary work, they found that 80% of women receive higher credit scores with the gender differentiated model than in a similar model that includes gender as a variable, but isn't estimated separately for women and men. And so this work is ongoing. They're still training this machine learning model. And then they're going to work with this bank in the Dominican Republic to do a randomized evaluation to try to quantify the impact of this new access to credit for these women who are eligible under this new differentiated model that wouldn't have been eligible under the traditional model. And so we're really excited to see if like that increased access to credit actually benefits these low-income women in the Dominican Republic. And then just for some other information, I've included a couple more of the research questions that we're starting to see results on. And so one that's not as women's focused is about digital loan disbursement. And basically, Alfredo Rolando and their team find that increasing the wait times for digital loan disbursement actually improves repayment and decreases default rates. And then another example is a team that was looking at the impacts of digital loans from Airtel Malawi. And this evidence thus far, while preliminary, suggests that the effects of digital credit are positive in this context. And there's some evidence that the positive impacts are higher for women. Okay, so that's a little sneak peek at what we're doing. If you go to the next slide, if you are interested in collaborating or learning more, you can visit our website where we have research descriptions of all of our studies. And then I'll share the link to our newsletter in the chat. And by subscribing to our newsletter, you can get quarterly updates on what we're doing, and then also invitations to results webinars with the research teams in which they discuss their findings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. Now we're going to just have a quick poll. So what percentage of women-owned small and medium enterprises in emerging markets have unmet credit needs? Less than 10%? 22%, 36%, or 68%. Leave that poll open for a few minutes. I think there's around 100 people online, so hopefully we can get a few more answers. And please do share any questions that you have for Marisa in the chat. We'll be having a question and answer session at the end of the 3 member shares. Okay, so it looks like most of you believe that 68% of women own small and medium enterprises in emerging markets have unmet credit needs. Great. And 78% of you were correct, I think, the results showed. Very well done. I'm now going to hand it over to Deanna Morris, who is going to speak about UNESCAP's work in Asia Pacific.
Thanks so much, Katie. And thanks for organizing this today. We're very excited to participate, and good morning and good evening for everyone in Asia. I'm in Asia. So I'm Deanna Morris. I'm from ESCAP. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're the largest intergovernmental platform for the UN in the Asia Pacific region. And today I'm going to present quite briefly and high level, because they only gave us 5 minutes, on our Catalyzing Women's Entrepreneurship program. A bit about our approach, but also some learnings that we've had over this past year particularly, and then what's next, and areas for collaboration. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a program overview so you get a bit of an understanding on what we're working on. We are a very targeted program focused on 6 countries in Southeast Asia, the Pacific, and South Asia. And our goal is to reach 20,000 women entrepreneurs by 2023, which is quite a big goal, because we're looking at very much supporting them in how to start up or expand their business, and have a very strong focus on access to finance. We're at 7,000 women right now, so we're well on our way to achieving our target. And we do take a market system approach. So we have several different pillars of the program where we look at where we're supporting policy and advocacy, not only with financial with the central banks, but also with broader ecosystem players, ministries of finance, supporting MSME roadmaps, and integrating gender into those. Also business development services, working with incubators and accelerator programs to support accountancy, marketing, expert promotion, and ICT skills. And then also access to finance, which is the area of the program which I manage. If we can go to the next slide. I also shouldn't forget that we are funded by the government of Canada, so just noting that there. But our program does have 4 different kind of elements that we're focusing on right now. On the fund side, we have 4 different funding initiatives which we've launched and are already in implementation. And those take a variety, like a very, I would say, scaled approach, where we are looking very much from the informal micro sector all the way up to the small and medium enterprise sector. So we're really reaching a range of different women entrepreneurs. And this is also because of the very, I would say, diverse markets that we're working in, from Fiji and Samoa to Bangladesh. The funds that we work on, particularly, I'll just give you a quick overview. One of them is a challenge fund, and this is in partnership with our partner UNCDF, which is a key partner to this project. And we have 8 different fintech partners that we're working with right now, and I'll share some of the lessons from some of the work with them. We're also supporting IIX. They have their Women's Livelihood Bond series, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We're supporting them in their impact measurement, but also their Women's Livelihood Bond 3, which will be coming out later this year. And also a multi-country guarantee fund in collaboration with Good Return, as well as the launch of an impact investment fund, which will be having the first close in the next month. And that's a $100 million private equity fund in partnership with CEF, who's leading that work. And just some kind of key bullet points from this year. I think it's an interesting year to be working in access to finance, and particularly women entrepreneurs who have been particularly hit hard by this pandemic. Some of the things that we've been seeing across the different countries, and very much consistently, I would say, is that, of course, as we all know, the shift to digital has been unprecedented. And as some of our colleagues mentioned earlier, the digital divide does need serious attention to prevent those from being left behind. We've also seen that platforms have helped women entrepreneurs really be able to quickly shift and adapt their businesses to the new market, particularly those working in the e-commerce sector, or sectors that can actually transition to e-commerce. So food products, fast-moving consumer goods, things like that. Also, despite the shift to digital and the e-commerce, cash is still king, as we're seeing here in Asia. We've seen a lot of people easily switch actually to e-commerce, but still prefer the cash on delivery payment mechanisms. The challenges for women entrepreneurs previously faced have just been exacerbated. I think we've seen that pretty consistently across all of the programs that we're working in the countries. And on the investment side, we've seen that even though the investment has really, I would say, slowed in the region due to COVID. Investors are cautious, but they are still investing. And this is seen by some of the fundraising that we've seen through the funds that we're working with in the raising of about $20 million over the last 4 months. So if we can go to the next slide. What's next for us? We have several things coming up in the next month, and these are areas where, again, we're always very happy to collaborate, but we have a few different things that I'm quite excited about, and one of those is being our research challenge. We've done a lot of challenge funds over the years, and what we've done is actually kind of turned our challenge fund on its head. So we know, the challenges that women entrepreneurs face in accessing finance and technology, but we wanted to get a better understanding of the nuanced challenges that those women are facing beyond just collateral constraints. So we've launched this research challenge. We'll be announcing the partners in the next month, and we have some very exciting initiatives that we'll be taking forward. One is a lean data initiative. Another one is a small firms diaries approach. So that will be taken forward in Fiji over a period of about 1.5 years. So we'll be getting some very interesting data out of that, and I'll be excited to share that with everyone. And other forms of data too, microfinance data mixed with product development and others. So we'll be consecutively launching all 6 of those research pieces early next year, and we'll be undertaking them in the next several months. We'll also be collaborating with UNCDF and launching in December a Women Enterprise Recovery Fund, and that's focused particularly on the agricultural and fast-moving consumer goods sector. We will also be launching an emergency COVID-19 facility, and that partnership will be announced this month. And we have ongoing work on advocacy campaigns to support women entrepreneurs' financial decision making. So we'll be happy to share some of that content with you guys in the group as well. But we are a very collaborative program. For those of you working in the countries that we're working in, we're always looking to find different ways of collaborating. So please do feel free to reach out. And I'll just go to the last slide. It just has our kind of contact information. I'll put my contact information in the group as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deanna. That was super interesting. So now we're going to have another poll. Hopefully everyone can see it. Okay, as per the World Economic Forum's 2018 Global Gender Gap Report, how many years will it take to close the gender gap for economic participation for women? People are already getting in here. So the options are 27 years, 96 years, 145 years, or 202 damn years. So most of you think it's 145 years, and unfortunately, I think that you are not correct. And the correct answer is indeed 202 damn years. So lots of work to be done. And that's a great segue into our next member share, which is with Naomi Bourne, who's going to be talking about some of UNCDF's policy initiatives, specifically their Africa Policy Accelerator. So I will start the 5-minute count and hand things over to Naomi.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for having me. And yes, that was a great poll to have just before this. I feel very passionately about more women in decision-making powers, and that includes financial authorities where women are definitely underrepresented, as I'm sure you all know. So I'm here representing the United Nations Capital Development Fund, UNCDF. I'm part of the Inclusive Digital Economy team, which is launching our new Women's Economic Empowerment and Financial Inclusion Strategy. It's called Women as Builders of Digital Economies. So this is a shameless plug for my colleague Nandini's session that's coming up next, so please do join. I'm specifically part of the policy team, and the Africa Policy Accelerator is our main project at the moment. We've been working with governments on policies and regulations related to digital financial services. That's a photo of me in Sierra Leone working with the central bank there, Bank of Sierra Leone. as you can see, our normal model is to sit in an office with a lot of people wearing suits. And I think what I'm trying to do today is talk about different ways that we can do public consultation and broaden our lens of who should be involved in that. And today I'll be talking about consumer groups as being another key stakeholder who we're hoping to encourage more regulators, particularly in Africa, to engage with on consumer protection regulations in particular. Next slide, please. So when it comes to women and participating directly in consultation processes, I think the key challenge that we're finding right now is that consumer advocacy groups, they just might not exist in a lot of countries. The resource constraints are definitely there in sort of every way, shape or form: funding, time, expertise. We do know that there's a lot of passionate people out there who are very close to the issues, very well connected to the women who are our end beneficiaries in all of this, but finding those channels to make sure that they can be part of the conversation is easier said than done, sadly. So that's our main objective here today, is to bridge that gap. And for now, that's our first step is really to build that awareness of consumer groups alongside CEGA, Consumer International, and other partners who are focusing on the consumer voice. Next slide, please. So Katie wanted us to speak more about the how, the practical process of how we do this. And I have to say, our main star is the Bank of Sierra Leone. They put a lot of work into their financial literacy framework last year. And because of the networks they were able to build with community leaders, and that could be all kinds of people, Sierra Leone, it's particularly religious leaders who are able to bring people together and say, after a church service, do some financial literacy exercises with people, which is great. But that meant that they had already done the hard work to really build that network of people all across the country. And at the moment, the Bank of Sierra Leone is consulting with groups all over the country on their financial consumer guidelines. So I have to say it looked easy, but they had a lot of work in finding those community leaders, making sure that they could keep in touch with them and run a process like this. In other countries, we're looking at other potential partners. Who are people like UN Women and Consumers International, which is the Association of Associations, which is another CEGA key partner. So that's why we're here today, to find more partners. And sorry, next slide, thank you. I just wanted to show an example of the sort of materials that we would take to these sorts of consultations, rather than, I guess, our standard way of doing consultation by giving the regulations themselves, is to break that down into scenarios, rather like a financial literacy exercise, because it's so closely related. But what are some sort of good practices that you could expect from financial services providers versus bad? And Marisa was talking about digital credit just before, which is already a serious concern for Sierra Leone. They've just approved a few mobile money providers to start digital credit products. So it's something that we want to raise awareness about now, before sorts of problems that we've seen in other countries can start to take place. Next slide, please. And so this is our ask from the team today. And sorry, I was hoping there would be a map there to show you what countries that we're in, but we're mostly focused on Central and West Africa, and a couple of countries in North Africa and East Africa as well. So if you know anyone who has done this kind of work before, if you've done this kind of work before, if you're interested in connecting with us and how we can bring sort of our government stakeholders and consumer advocacy stakeholders together, we would love to hear from you. That's my email address on that slide there, but I will also post it in the chat. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Naomi. That was really interesting. And I want, before we move into the Q&A, I just want to draw everyone's attention to the chat, where there is a lot of really useful links being posted to some of the work that our member share discussants have discussed. So I don't want to, I don't want people to not see that. I know the chat can get quite busy. I wanted to start off though with a question from Radhi Manikant to Marisa, which was, could you explain the key characteristics of gender criteria versus gender as a variable in credit scoring?
Yes, thanks for the question. It's a really good one because I think that this study is pretty nuanced in like the difference of what a gender differentiated credit scoring model is versus just considering gender as a variable. And because there's a lot of like data privacy concerns around this project, I don't have the exact characteristics to tell you, unfortunately, but essentially the main difference is instead of just using gender as a variable in this case, they're basically using the machine learning model to include the interactions between gender and other variables. And so instead of just being like, oh, you're a woman, it's also you're a woman and you have this type of business, you're a woman and you have this thing about you, and it's getting at those interactions so that we can kind of parse out and make sure that gender isn't just being used as like a bias in the credit scoring model, if that helps answer your question. Thank you.
Great. And now I want to move to a question for Deanna. How many participants will be included in the diary research?
20 to 30. We're still working on the design because we're doing it with a partner, which I will announce soon. It's still getting the sign off, but it will be 20 to 30 and it will be ongoing over a period of a year. But this is part of a broader research initiative. So there will be other countries included as well, which will allow for some interesting comparison.
Perfect. And while I've got you there, we have another question for you from Daniel Fuentes. What are the main challenges you're seeing in communicating the market system impact of your work to the investment community?
Oh, this is always a challenge, I would say. First of all, getting I would say, first is the monitoring evaluation process, right, of understanding the market system impact that you are even having. And then next is communicating that. We are a more new program. We started in 2018 and really started the implementation after a 1-year kind of planning phase. So in 2019. So we're getting to the stage now where we are seeing this kind of snowball effect happening. And we have not yet started communicating all of those results. So 2021 is going to be our year where we're really kind of, I would say, amp up the communications. You'll probably see from our website, we need to work on that too. So, but I would actually put that question back to the group as well in terms of any best practices where they are seeing in terms of communicating kind of their market system impacts would be also, I think, a very good discussion to have in the group.
Thank you. It's a great point, and please do use this chat or bring up any questions you have on D groups community. This is a resource for all of you. I'd like to move to a question for Naomi, and this is from Eric Duflo of CEGA. He fully agrees that we need to find ways to elevate women's voice in policy making. We are currently working on research that includes consumer associations as well as technology and regulatory councils as mechanisms to elevate the collective voice of consumers. And he looks forward to collaborating. So actually that was hot off the press. I'm going to give you another question, Naomi, which I have for you. What is the process to become a partner? How does that process look like from your perspective, from the partner's perspective?
That's a great question. And as you probably guessed, we're right at the beginning of this process. So it'll be a new process that we're hoping to start with partners. We're really looking for anyone who's interested and who has time, frankly, which goes back to the resource question. It's anyone who has, as I said, is well connected in the countries that we're working in, it can be all kinds of organizations. Other types that I didn't mention are people who might be involved in free legal aid, or academics, or anyone who's had experience with this sort of thing, any kind of interest in financial services. And I think I spied another question about how do you encourage people to get into this sort of thing. And really, it's been great to see the reaction so far. People do really want to have their voices heard when it comes to government policies and regulations, even when it's about financial services. So it's really great to see that people do want to be involved. It just has to be, I guess, a little bit more structured, and that's what we're hoping to do with our partners. Thanks.
Fantastic. I'm going to take it back to Marisa. You had a research question on the unintended negative consequences of digital credit. Any preliminary findings there? Have you noticed digital credit eroding informal or social networks that women tend to rely on, particularly in low-income countries? If yes, would you view this as a negative consequence necessarily? That's about 6 questions in one, but how about it?
Yes, thank you. And it's a really great question. I think this is one of the things that we really care about, is if there's these unintended negative consequences. Unfortunately, none of our preliminary evidence thus far has results on this fact, but this is definitely going to be a central theme of the synthesis paper we're planning to publish towards the end of 2021. So I hope anyone that's interested in that stays tuned. I will say that one of the studies we're super interested in seeing what they find in terms of women's empowerment is, I can put the link to the study here, but they are basically looking at whether digital repayment to traditional microfinance kind of affects those social networks that traditional microfinance has. And so that one is still in the field, was a little delayed because of COVID, so we don't have results yet, but we're excited to see what they learn. Sorry, I don't have more to say now.
Thanks so much. Now I think this is a question for Deanna, and this is around the research diaries again. So the diary research across countries you plan to cover, or you cover, will be so interesting. Is there a step plan to work with policymakers to incorporate these findings, or more to support investors?
It's both. From our side, actually across, I mentioned that we're doing all 6 studies. It was, I have to say that the entire process was very interesting, because the reason we did this was to get the research so that we can then design our next challenge fund around that research. But actually what we're seeing from all of the applicants actually was that it was very much kind of human-centered design in nature for all of them, but also had policy aspects too. So with all of the agreements that we are currently finalizing, we have aspects of product design, we have aspects of, actually, in the end, most of these, this research will be more action research, where it's actually influencing the design of a product or service itself. So that's very interesting, I would say, from the kind of product design angle, but also on the policy side too. Every single one of the research pieces has a policy element to it. And it's very important for us as ESCAP, some of our bread and butter work is actually working with the governments. And in each of the countries that our program works in, we have a government steering committee who advises us. And it's very much, I would say, a demand-based process of having this interaction with the government stakeholders. So all of this research will be fed back to them as well, and also providing policy recommendations.
Thank you so much for that answer. And thank you to all our member shares. This has been a really interesting question, and we have a huge amount of resources that have come through in the chat. I will be capturing all of those resources, and they will be shared as part of the report out from this virtual meeting. I'm now going to hand things back